There's one clue that every mystery's gotta have, and that's the damning clue. This is the big one, the one that makes your readers gasp in delight knowing that the case has been cracked. You might think that you're going to need to rack your brain to come up with the perfect damning clue for your book, but it's actually going to be pretty straightforward because you don't have a lot of options. In fact, there's only about five ways to write the damning clue. Let's go over all of them. For our first way to write the damning clue, we're going to look at an episode of Murdoch Mysteries called Still Waters. In this episode, an affluent young man named Richard Hartley is found beaten and drowned. It turns out that Hartley had just joined the rowing crew at his country club and no one was happy about him being on the team. In order to get the spot, he used his social status to shoulder out a much better rower, Horace Briggs, the club's gardener who had been rowing with the team. Remember this box, it's going to be important. The case seems to be solved when Murdoch discovers a critical clue, Horace's oar with a telltale trace of blood. So we've got an object that's strongly associated with one suspect and it's been linked to the murder. And this is the first way you can create the damning clue, create a tangible link between the villain and the crime. However, after examining the oar, the case quickly falls apart. The blood on it is too fresh and the wood doesn't match the slivers taken from the victim's wounds. Murdoch learns that the rowing crew administered the beating to Hartley. They wanted Horace back on the team, so they enacted a hazing ritual that they hoped would be brutal enough to spur Hartley to quit. He ran off when the beating became severe, and when he turned up dead, the rowers all think that their actions led to his drowning. At this point, they decided to cut their losses and throw Horace under the bus by doctoring his oar to look like the murder weapon. Once their subterfuge is uncovered, the link we thought we had between Horace and the crime is broken, and he's in the clear. Until, that is, Murdoch examines water from the victim's lungs and finds fragments of fluorescent bone. It's bone meal, a fertilizer from that box I asked you to remember, and it was on Horace's hands when he held Hartley down in a bath and drowned him. Okay, this is the exact same type of clue that we had with the oar. It's an item closely associated with the villain, which creates a link between him and the crime. This sort of link may be the best place to start when you begin brainstorming your damning clue. But before you get started, I do want to point out that when I say a tangible link, I don't necessarily mean something that you can hold in your hand, like the oar or the bone fragments. I mean anything that can be perceived by the senses, a taste, a sound, possibly even a smell. In an episode of Remington Steele called Gourmet Steele, the damning clue is the voice of the villain, which the sleuth's assistant heard when he had her briefly kidnapped.
She's a wrong woman, get rid of her.
When she hears the same voice coming from a man who was never even a suspect, she knows he's guilty. His voice represents a direct link from villain to crime. And that is all we are doing with tangible clues. You can link the villain to the crime scene, you can link the villain to the weapon, you can link the villain to the victim's person, or you may even be able to link the victim to an intimate location, like the villain's home or his car. But they're all links, okay? They all establish that the villain was present at the crime. For our next way of writing the damning clue, we're going to look at another episode of Murdoch Mysteries called Convalescence. And in this episode, our sleuth will be Murdoch's faithful assistant, Constable Crabtree. Crabtree investigates the murder of a man found stabbed to death in an alley, and when he finds the scene of the crime in the kitchen of a fancy French restaurant, he also finds a parrot. He takes the parrot back to the precinct where it seems to take a strong dislike to his boss, Inspector Brackenreed.
You go. You get out of here.
Crabtree investigates several people, including the victim's former business partner, Hugo Brickhouse, and a parrot expert, Travis Struthers. At last, he makes an illuminating discovery. The parrot wasn't saying, "You go," it was saying, "Hugo," the name of one of the suspects. This is a witness statement, and it's our second way of creating a damning clue. And although we're hearing this statement from a bird, its actual source is our victim. The parrot was merely repeating his final words. Witness statements can come from any character, a passerby, a disgruntled accomplice, but it's actually very common for it to come from the victim. He can scrawl the name of his assailant in the dirt or use a recording device such as an iPhone or a parrot. Why do witness statements usually come from the victim? Well, first, because it's awesome, but second, because the victim is the one person from whom we cannot seek clarification. See, Here's the thing about witness statements. They're usually not going to give you the whole story, or to be more accurate, they're usually not going to give you the correct story. The first time you see these statements, they're usually going to come in a distorted form, just like the one in this episode. We thought the parrot was saying, "You go," and he was actually saying, "Hugo." See, we want our damning clue to be understood right at the end of our investigation. A tangible clue can be found near the end, like the bone fragments in the still waters, but witness statements are generally going to be taken close to the beginning. To bridge this gap, we can distort our witness statement, forcing our sleuth to puzzle out its real meaning. That's one good reason, but even more important is this. We want to see our sleuth work hard to find the bad guy, and just being told who he is usually is not going to cut it. Solving a puzzle though, especially one set by an ornery parrot, that works. If you feel like this video is helping you understand how to bring your mystery together with a big finish, do me a favor and just tap that little like button. It helps this channel grow, and if it doesn't help, well, it just makes me feel really good. And then let's talk about our next way to create a damning clue using an episode of Monk called Mr. Monk Takes the Stand. This episode begins with Monk giving testimony against wealthy murderer Evan Gilday, only to fall apart under cross-examination, leading to Gilday's acquittal. Even though Monk knows Gilday is guilty, he failed to prove it in court, and because no one can be tried twice for the same crime, he'll never get a second chance. While they're at the courthouse, Monk's friend Randy runs into a young boy to whom he was once a mentor, only to realize that he's at the courthouse because he's being arraigned for murder. Rudy is on the hook for the bludgeoning death of the owner of an auto parts store. He admits that he stole money and a necklace from her, but insists that when he left, she was fine. The security footage from that night is mysteriously missing, but Rudy's fingerprints are on the cash register, and that is enough to convict him. The only hope he has is if Monk can figure out who murdered the owner after Rudy left. It turns out to be Gilday, who stopped at the auto parts store shortly after committing the murder for which he's just been acquitted. After witnessing Rudy's theft, he realized that the security footage would wind up in police hands, and that if he was noticed on it, he'd be tied to a location close to the scene of the crime. He decided the only thing to do was to destroy both the security footage and the only witness. Monk is sure Gilday is guilty, but once again, he's having a hard time proving it. Gilday is set to walk until he has this little interaction on his way out of the police station.
When are you people gonna stop hassling me? And we've got the real killer right in front of you. That dope-smoking, chain-snatching little thug right over there.
This is our third way of delivering the damning clue: revealing knowledge. There are lots of little facts surrounding a mystery: where it occurred, when it occurred, how the victim was dressed, you name it. So some of these things are going to be common knowledge, but some of them are only going to be known to two kinds of people: the investigators and the killer. When Gilday referred to Rudy as a chain-stealing punk, he exposed himself as someone who was definitely at the scene of the crime. He can't be tried again for his first murder, but now he can go to prison for the death of the store owner. Our last tactic is one of my very favorites, and we're going to look at it in an episode of Murdoch Mysteries called Murdoch.com. Yeah, it's a very Murdoch video today. In this episode, a young woman is found murdered by the river. When Dr. Ogden notices a callus on her forefinger, Murdoch theorizes that she's a telegrapher, that is, someone who operates telegraph lines. He goes to the telegraph office where he meets the victim's co-worker, Beth Tipton, and her boss, Gabriel Ryder. As he digs deeper into the case, he learns that the dead woman was one of many victims of a catfishing campaign run by a mysterious someone who calls himself AK. He chats up young female telegraphers over the telegraph lines, makes them feel special, and eventually pumps them for cash. Murdoch tries to catfish the catfisher by enlisting the help of his telegrapher girlfriend. But when it seems like he's closing in, the killer gets angry. Murdoch is worried that one of the catfishing victims, Beth Tipton, is in danger. He goes to her home and finds an obvious crime scene along with a telltale clue, a cane that belonged to her boss, Gabriel Ryder. Now, we could view this cane as a damning clue that links Gabriel to the crime, but the case doesn't end there. Murdoch receives a desperate message from Beth and finds her locked in a disused telegraph office. She tearfully tells him that Gabriel is the mysterious AK and that he kidnapped her. Only something seems wrong. Murdoch realizes that the knot in the rope wasn't behind Beth's hands. Rather, it was between her hands and her body. Rather a strange way for a villain to tie someone up. But perhaps it would be possible if she had tied the rope herself. This is our fourth way to deliver the damning clue. Break a narrative on which the villain has staked her innocence. Most villains maintain several narratives, that is, lies, that make them seem innocent. They lie about their motives, about their alibis, and about how much they liked the victim. A villain who's desperate for cash might maintain the narrative that he's just fine financially. A villain who used an accomplice might maintain the narrative that he doesn't actually know her. If these narratives start to collapse, the villain's illusion of innocence may topple. In this case, I was kidnapped is one of Beth's narratives, and the illusion of her innocence is 100% dependent on that narrative remaining unbroken. If the narrative doesn't hold, she can't provide any innocent explanation for her behavior. As soon as Murdoch realizes that the kidnapping is fake, he's got his damning clue. Okay, but I promised you 5 ways to deliver the damning clue, so what's the last one? Well, it's to trick the villain into revealing their own guilt by constructing a sleuth's trap. Now, there are a lot of ways to do this, so I made a whole video explaining it. If you want a killer ending for your mystery, you might want to check that one out next.